be honest, I get lots of emails of startups writing like, oh, this is what we're doing. Maybe it can be interesting for you. And this is difficult for me then, because then I'm sending, I'm forwarding this to the team and they're like, yeah, okay, seems cool, but like, I don't really know where we can use it. And then I would say in 99.9% of the cases, nothing comes out of it. So I think in order to, besides the pull approach, where we actually actively scout for startups, but in order to really be successful with a push approach as a startup is to be aware of which problem they are solving and addressing this problem.
I'm Aneri, co-founder and partner of Climatic Group. I'm really excited about our guest today, Lisa Krotochwill, who is the startup engagement manager at Verbund. Based in Austria, they are working on scaling energy tech. And first question for Lisa is to tell me your story and what got you into venture clienting.
Yes, hello, Aneri. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to join you in this podcast episode today. As you said, my name's Lisa. I'm based in Vienna, Austria, working for Austria's biggest utility. We are active in Austria, but also we are active in Germany, in Spain, Romania, Italy. So slowly expanding, but our focus area is in Austria. And I'm responsible at Verbund for our venture clienting or startup engagement. Venture clienting, as you know, is a new fancy word for startup corporations, but that's what I'm doing. And actually my way there is very random. I'm actually a mechanical engineer and I studied in Vienna, Austria. And during my master's, I started focusing a lot on energy technology, but also the energy economy. And after my studies, I was like, okay, I need to, leave Vienna, Austria for a while. And I moved to Berlin and I started working at the German Energy Agency in the team of digitalization. Why digitalization? Just because that was the role. So, when it's your first job, you just apply to a few roles. And then I found this one. I started working there. Back then, we were a super small team. So it was basically 2 people plus our boss, plus a working student. And my focus topic was artificial intelligence. So I tried to see where can AI help to accelerate the energy transition. And at the German Energy Agency, we're working a lot together with both the ministry, startups, and big companies. So this was, I would say, like the first step into the whole innovation ecosystem. We then grew quite a lot as a team, and now DENA, the short form in German, is quite active when it comes to startups in the energy transition. They have the Future Energy Lab in Berlin, which is very cool. I can highly recommend to visit it. And yeah, I was working there for a few years, and then I decided, okay, first of all, I still need to travel a bit more. So I did a 1-year break, and I was traveling through South and Central America. And I was thinking this is a good time also to see, is energy really the thing I want to continue working in? And when I came back from my trip, I realized, yes, this is my passion. I want to help continue driving the energy transition. But I also realized it's time for me to go back to my home country, to Austria. And I started working at Verbund in the innovation team. So since I was working already in, this innovative field in Berlin, I wanted to continue working in innovation. And I was first working more in business development for our new storage projects. So we have a very strong focus at Verbund on new storage technologies. So basically everything between lithium, iron and hydro pump storage. And I was looking at, how to make those new storage technologies somehow profitable. It's difficult, but it was very interesting. And then my colleague who was leading our venture clienting program, which is called Verbund Accelerator, which is a little bit misleading because it's not really an accelerator. As I said, it's more venture clienting. Well, he left the company and this position opened. And I thought, okay, I'm a social person. I like to work together with startups. I like to talk with people. So why not? Let's try it. This was in October 24. And back then, I never heard about the word venture clienting. And I had no idea what it is. And I had no idea that this is actually what we're doing. But when I took over this program, I said, okay, let's see, let's analyze it. Let's see how it is going. Let's see how we can improve it. Let's learn more about it. And then it was just natural that sooner or later I came across the word of venture clienting, and I started to read a lot about it. I started to talk a lot with people on events. And yeah, this is where I am right now, leading this program, trying to improve it, trying to learn from others. I have to say, one thing I realize is that no matter which industry, I'm working in the energy industry, but no matter which industry, when it comes to startup collaborations between corporates and startups, we all pretty much face the same challenges. So it's super impactful to talk a lot with others and to learn from their lessons.
Yeah, that's a really interesting story. And I actually really like that you went traveling and kind of got more interested in energy through traveling, because that's also similar to me. I got spent a lot of time in other countries and really saw how energy kind of defines people's lives and how good quality of life they can have. So I just picked up on that as something that I also saw that you also had that in your story. So
Yeah, it's actually interesting. We always, because me being always in Europe, working in Europe or Germany, but in Austria, we are always looking at the same challenges, right? And we think this is how it is in the rest of the world. But then traveling really showed me in other countries, they have very much sometimes different problems in completely different things challenges they're facing. So, for instance, I was in Honduras in an island called Utila.
mm,
And this is an island where basically they have sun all year round. Very like perfect location, for some PV and some storage. However, there's not even one PV on the island. They use a generator. There's power outage, I would say, once every 3-4 days, and electricity is super expensive. So I was renting a 1-bedroom apartment there, and I paid $200 per month for electricity,
wow.
which is super expensive, and even more, of course, for the locals. Of course, I had air conditioning. The locals often cannot afford this, so they're in very hot homes. So this was something I saw. I realized, wow, we are very privileged in Europe when it comes to this. And another story I would like to share, this was super interesting, was last year on the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue. And I think it was a minister from, I think it was Nigeria. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it was Nigeria. And he was having this speech on stage. And he was saying, listen, if we would be now in Nigeria, if the audience would be now all people from Nigeria, half of the people, if you say energy transition, they wouldn't even know from what we transition from,
Mm,
because they just have no access to electricity. And this was very eye opening for me, because it made me realize that we are always in our bubble in Europe. And we are sometimes so narrow minded when we look at the energy sector, because we have, we already have, I would say, like an 80% version. And in other countries, they're starting with zero. So yeah, this is something very interesting that I got from traveling, to get a bit of different view on what the energy system globally really means.
yeah, for sure. And also, when you're describing the energy storage solution space, I actually think that emerging market solutions tend to get overlooked in Europe and the US because they're really innovating and designing for this because they have to.
Yes.
So there's actually a lot of really fantastic off-grid storage solutions, especially with humanitarian zones and relief zones that have to be cheaper, they have to be stable and reliable. That could also be utilized in Europe as well. But yeah, no, thank you for sharing the stories. It's always great to hear where our passion really comes from, right? And energy.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you talked about Verbund Accelerator already, but maybe you can just go in a little bit more detail about how specifically you collaborate with startups through it.
Yes, true. So actually, the program is not just it's a Verbund program, but we actually have also some corporate partners that work together with us in some of the projects. These are mainly partners from, I would say, the DACH region, but also mainly Austria. And the idea is, or the way we go in the process, it's pretty, I would say, standard venture clienting process, but we first step try to find a pain point or a challenge together with our business units and or our corporate partners to see what is something that we either need a solution for or a process that we can improve or even like some new product or business that we could develop together. So this is the first stage. And then we start scouting, right? We look what startups are there that could provide the solution. Maybe before I should mention, before this scouting part, I think one really important aspect is also to assess if a startup is, scouting for a startup is the right solution for the problem. Because sometimes it might be a problem where we would say, you know what, probably it's better if we develop something ourselves. So I think it's also important to be honest, with everyone and really see, can a startup provide a solution? If we say yes, we go into the scouting phase. So we see what startups are out there. And then we have typical selection. So we shortlisting them. Then with the, I would say, best 3 to 5 startups, we have remote pitch calls where they present the solution, where we assess are they a fit for the problem or for the use case or not. And then we choose one startup with which we then try to get into a pilot project, which is, I would say, between 3 to 6 months. And if the results is what we were looking for, and we see potential, we try to get into a long-term collaboration. So this is, I would say, the typical process. There are some parts, I would say, from this process that we're already very good in. I think there are some parts that we can still improve. One thing, for instance, that I'm working on right now is to basically create or improve our KPI list that we, together with the project team, define at the beginning of the pilot, so that by the end of the pilot project, we can clearly assess was this project a success or not. Because sometimes, when the pilot project is over, suddenly the question arises, the budget, the human resources, the time, all these things. And then it's often difficult for the project team to get the permission for all this budgets of human resources. However, if you have clearly defined KPIs, you can show, oh, look, actually this project, it was successful because this and this and that. It's much easier. So this is something, for example, we are working on right now, just to give an example, but this is the process. And I think one thing that's also quite unique about the Verbund X Accelerator is the aspect of our corporate partners. So this was actually something that started in 2020. This is when the Verbund X Accelerator was founded. So 5 years ago, we have a 5-year anniversary this year, our birthday. And it started in 2020, as you can imagine, through the pandemic times, because the team realized, okay, it's really hard now to exchange and connect with our corporate partners, with our business partners. And this could be a good vehicle to foster collaboration. And this, I think, is actually a really cool aspect because there are just some use cases where it makes a lot of sense if we are not by ourselves as Verbund, but we have a second partner on board. First of all, to share risk, to share costs, like this is like the easy ones, but also mainly to share expertise. And I would like to give an example just so you understand why it makes sometimes a lot of sense. We had a use case last year in the vehicle to grid domain. And we were working together on this use case. So Verbund as a company and Porsche with their like e-mobility infrastructure provider Moon. And this was a great collaboration because if you work on a vehicle to grid, you need the energy, the electricity, but you also need the vehicle infrastructure and vehicles that are also capable of providing the bidirectional charging technology. And we're working together there with Porsche and with the startup. And I always say it's a bit like when you build a bridge. You build a bridge, and if you start building a bridge from both sides and you don't align, then in the worst case, you reach the middle and the bridge, is misaligned. So I think this is one of the USPs of the program. And also one of the things I'm trying now to, again, push a little bit more to really have this co-creation use cases, because I see a lot of potential there. And it's also fun to work together with another corporate. It makes it a bit more complicated because sometimes it's already hard to form a contract between a corporate and a startup. And then you have another corporate. But I think it can be very beneficial.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I actually haven't heard anyone discuss, co-creating, like two corporates co-creating a venture clienting together, basically. So that's really interesting. Can you also maybe share examples of successful pilots that your team has facilitated with startups? And if any of them have gone beyond pilot, that'd be even more interesting to hear.
Yeah. I don't want to mention concrete project, and this is because I think that sometimes, especially when it comes to venture clienting activities, we are focusing a lot on the success stories, the
Right.
best practices. I think it's very important, right, to have like this storyline and also to explain what can be the benefits of venture clienting. However, sometimes I feel we are focusing a little bit too much on the success stories, which normally always equals long-term partnership. I mean, of course, this is the goal, right? In the end, the goal is to have a long-term partnership that benefits the startup, that benefits the corporate, that benefits the customers of both of them. But at least for me, as someone who is responsible for the venture clienting in a big corporate, I think that sometimes creates a lot of pressure, because pilot projects are not always only successful if they get into a long-term partnership. For instance, we had a project where there was like this hypothesis in the room for a long time that this solution could provide a lot of benefit to the business unit. They found a startup, tested it with a startup. The startup built the solution. The solution was working. It was an AI-based business model, but they realized that the impact this had was just not as much as they thought it would be, and that it was not really worth it to implement. So this is why this didn't get into a long-term partnership. However, I personally think it was still a successful project, because something they thought for, many, I don't know, years, it could work. They learned, okay, it's not really creating impact. Now we can focus on other things. So I think this, for example, was a successful project, even though it did not end in a long-term partnership. Right now, we had a use case where they did a pilot project with a startup, and this would have been a white label solution. And during the pilot project, the startup delivered. They were very happy with the outcomes, the business unit. But I mean, by what they defined, as KPIs. But they realized that the product they were looking at here, it's so important. Like, it plays such a crucial role in the long-term strategy of this business unit, that they decided, okay, actually, we don't want a white label solution, but we want to build it ourselves. So we have full control over the data and full control over all the features. So again, no long-term partnership, but in the end, they still learn something out of it. Of course, for startups, it seems that this is kind of like the worst case scenario.
Right.
Because they're like, okay, now we invested, our time, and we invested our all the effort, and now nothing comes out of it. However, I talked with a few startups about this, and I would say I got different opinions. And some said, though, that for them, even though it does not go into a long-term partnership, it can still be beneficial for them. Because if, let's say, we as Verbund, decide not to go into a long-term collaboration because of reason X, Y, Z, it can also help them to further either develop their product, or maybe to focus on different areas. Because if Verbund says, okay, out of these reasons, we don't want a long-term partnership, maybe other companies will do so as well. So even though I would say it's not the ideal outcome for a startup, it can still, I think, be beneficial. And sometimes, to be honest, we just realize that maybe for the Verbund business unit is not ready for a startup collaboration yet. We also see this with our corporate partners. This is also a learning out of pilot project. Sometimes we realize, okay, the startup kind of overpromised when we chose it, and now doesn't really deliver, which is which is bad, but it sometimes happens. And so this is why I think all these things, out of all these things, you can learn something. For example, this overpromising part, it's a
Hmm.
tricky one because of course startups want to sell the product.
Right.
But something we learned out of this is that when it comes into the selection process, we need to ask more questions and we need to get more in depth. In the past years, we had this half an hour remote pitches. Half an hour is super short. It's super
Hmm.
short to go into depth and to really analyze and understand if the startup can deliver. So this is something, for example, we want to adjust now, especially for use cases that are more complex. So again, out of all of this, we learn something. And so this is why I didn't want to mention any specific use case because sometimes we focus too much on the success stories and less on the process and also on improving the different aspects of the process.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you've articulated really well how venture clienting can be a cheaper and more efficient process for corporate when working with startups because it's faster to assess the risks. Because traditionally, before venture clienting was really a thing, corporates would just buy startups and acquire them. But it's way more expensive to do that and then discover that the technology that they now own isn't really working to their liking and then close down basically the acquisition and layoff or whatever you have to do than it is to, test it out through a venture clienting process. So I think
Yeah,
both the situations explained, an acquisition would have been a really bad outcome if instead venture clienting ended up being a good outcome for Boone.
absolutely. And actually, since you mentioned the acquisition part, actually, this is something we realized it's going really well hand in hand, as in the accelerator being kind of like the first stage, like the pilot project, and then investing is the second stage. Because if we, let's say, have a pilot project with a startup and then we go into long-term partnership and the business unit says, okay, like, the product that they're providing, this is working super well, then this is a perfect, kind of quality stamp for our investment team that this might be a good startup to invest in. And actually, here I would like to give an example because I think this is like a wonderful, like showcase on how these two innovation instruments go hand in hand. We had this use case where we wanted to improve our forecasting for load management, mobility load management. And we worked together with a Romanian startup that also now based in the UK called Ogre AI. And we had this pilot project, and the team was super happy. They actually got into a long term partnership now. And I think the reason why this is so interesting is because, I mean, there are loads of startups out there that do forecasting.
Right.
Of course, they all promise they're the best in it.
Mhm.
So, to be honest, the only real way how to assess if, they're one of the best is to actually test it with them. And our Verbund team was so happy and so convinced of the results that our investment team knew, okay, their forecasting is great. They have a really great team of experts, PhDs in all kind of prestigious universities in the UK and Europe. So the investment team knew, okay, when it comes to the technology, that's a go. And then they only had to kind of analyze the other aspect. So this is, I think, the perfect example how venture clienting actually can be a great first stage before investing in startups.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's great that Verbund has so many different ways of working with startups as well. You should have different strategies, whether it's investing or collaborating or acquiring. That there's like a lot of different methods that you're utilizing. Um,
Exactly.
Yeah. What can you share some specific challenges that you're looking for solutions in at the moment?
When it comes to I mean, the problems we're looking in, of course, they always kind of cover our main markets. So at Verbund, we work together with business and private customers. We have a hydrogen business unit. We have a PV and wind and lots of hydropower. So I would say the majority of our challenges are in these sectors. A lot of the topics we're looking at are digitalization topics, lots of AI, lots of drones. So I would say quite the typical things, forecasting and predictive maintenance, of course, as well. So these are the things we are focusing on. However, something I also want to now take a closer look in the upcoming year is not just looking at product innovation, but also at process innovation. I think this is something we talk sometimes way too little in venture clienting. And to be honest, just because it's not so sexy to say, oh, we are using, we're collaborating with a startup that improves our timekeeping. It's just not such a cool use case, right? But in the end, if it saves resources, it saves money, it's still driving the energy transition in a way because it gives us more time or more money to invest in renewable energy infrastructure, for example. So process innovation, also an important topic. And when it comes to product innovation, as I said before, lots of digital technology topics. And we try to be very open-minded when we talk with our business units and our teams, what they are looking at. And most importantly, we try, which is not always easy, to not push specific topics on them or not push specific technologies on them, because sometimes this push approach sometimes tricky because it sometimes doesn't really solve a real problem. And then maybe you somehow make it to a pilot project, but in the next stage often is the pilot project graveyard where nothing long term comes out of this. So I think it's always important to first find the problem and then see, what could be the solution and also which technology. Yeah.
And so, if a startup is listening right now and heard your challenges and thinks that they have an appropriate solution for it and wants to work with you, what should they do?
Contact us and contact me or contact us as the innovation team, but contact us plus have a problem that they think we are facing that they are solving. So I think this is very important that they are aware that which problem they're solving and see if we have this problem. Because to be honest, I get lots of emails of startups writing like, oh, this is what we're doing. Maybe can be interesting for you. And this is difficult for me then because then I'm sending, I'm forwarding this to the team and they're like, yeah, okay, seems cool, but like I don't really know where we can use it. And then I would say in 99.9% of the cases, nothing comes out of it. So I think in order to, besides the pull approach, where we actually actively scout for startups, but in order to really be successful with a push approach as a startup is to be aware of which problem they are solving and addressing this problem. Because then for me, it's much easier. I can reach out to the team and I can say, hey, look, do you have this problem? And if they say, oh, yes, actually, we have this problem, I say, cool, because this is a startup that is solving that problem. Maybe you want to have an exchange. So I think this is something that a lot of startups are missing. And this is something I would like to, I would like for every startup to take away. If there's one thing to take away from this podcast, if hopefully they made it until the end here, is know the problem you are solving.
Yes, I love that. And I think that is a really interesting way to, especially like if there's a cold approach to say, this is what my solution solves, rather than my solution can save you X% in money or time, because that's just describing the benefits of the solution, but not specifically the actual problem that a business unit might be facing. So that's a really great advice. We'll probably snatch that quote and utilize that.
Yes. I was just thinking it could also be like printed on a t-shirt. It's like a t-shirt printing.
No, the problem you're solving.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. This was a really enlightening discussion. And for our listeners out there, if please continue to subscribe and listen to Climatic Scale podcast, which you could find on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on our Substack, climaticgroup.substack.com, where we'll be showcasing industry leaders like Lisa, experts, and really exciting solution providers who are talking about how they're scaling an energy climate solutions in the world. So thanks again for listening, and see you soon.
Thank you so much, Derek, for having me. Bye-bye.